Well, here's our next assignment. If the heart is the problem in a marriage, what's the problem with the heart? What is it that goes on in the heart that makes these relationships of life difficult? Well, again, here's one of these passages that I just think is power-packed with relational diagnosis, relational wisdom, and actually relational hope. Let me read. For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. Now that went by very fast. Let me read 15 again. And he died for all, that those who live, hear this, should no longer live for themselves. Here's what sin does to all of us. Sin causes us to shrink our lives down to the size of our lives. Sin causes me to narrow my personal field of concern down to the claustrophobic confines of my wants, my needs, my feelings. Sin inserts me in the center of my little universe, the one place I must never be, because the place for God and God alone. Sin really does make it all about me, my wants, my needs, my feelings. Now hear this. Because the power of sin has been broken, that's justification, but the presence of sin still remains and is being progressively eradicated. That's sanctification. What this verse is saying is applicable to 10 out of 10 people in this room. We all still have sin in us, and we all struggle with that inertia of sin, that motivation of sin, my wants, my needs, my feelings. I want chocolate at ready reach all the time. I'm quite serious. Just coat the world in it, so at any point I can take a bite. I want to drive on roads paid for by other citizens who choose not to use them. I want a wife who says to me, "Of course, Paul, I agree with you. I've lived with the glory that is you." I want children who say, "Yes, Father, I will forthwith go and obey because you, sir, are wise." I want neighbors who move into the neighborhood just because I live there. I want, 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 I want. Are you uncomfortable yet? I want, I want, I want. Welcome to your world. Now let's think about the logic of what Paul is saying, the theology that's embedded in this passage, very practical theology. Here's the first thing. Paul is actually arguing that the DNA of sin is selfishness. The DNA of sin is selfishness. Selfishness is what sin is about. You don't sin for somebody else, you do it for you. It's I want what I want, when I want it, how I want it, where I want it, with whom I want it, and I don't want rules put on me. Imagine the shocking selfishness of Adam and Eve, who were in a perfect world. They had everything. It wasn't enough. My wants, my needs, my feelings. Sin is fundamentally meistic. Me. Here's the second thing. If that's true, then sin is antisocial in its fundamental form. Sin is antisocial in its fundamental form. I was meant to live an outward and upward life. Upward in worship to God, outward in self-sacrificing love of neighbor. But sin turns me in on myself. Sin makes me all too self-focused, all too self-absorbed, all too self-centered. It's actually an unrelational way of doing a relationship. Now, this is very important. That means that my big problem in my marriage is not my husband or my wife. In fact, it means that the biggest problem I have in my marriage, the selfishness of sin, I drug into my marriage. I brought it with me. I brought those antisocial instincts into marriage with me. Here's where we have to go, and I include myself on this. I gave empirical evidence of this even this week. God help me. I mean it. That you have to say that as long as sin still lives inside of you, and it does, you carry inside of you something that's destructive to relationships, and you need help. As long as sin is inside of you, you carry something inside of you that's potentially destructive to relationships, and you need help. All of us need help. I wish I could say that everything I have done in my marriage is loving and kind and patient and sweet and good, but it's not. There are moments of shocking impatience, shocking selfishness. There are words that I've said that I wish I could take out of history and take out of memory that I deeply regret. Because that destructive thing still lives inside of me. The DNA of sin is selfishness. That means sin is antisocial in its fundamental form. Here's the third thing. That means it will cause you to dehumanize that other person in your marriage. It will cause you to dehumanize that other person in your marriage. Say, Paul, what in the world does that mean? It means this, that your spouse quits being the object of your affection. They get reduced down to being a vehicle or obstacle. If they're a vehicle helping you get what you want, you love them. You thank God that they're in your life. Cards and flowers, maybe even an occasional box of chocolate. But if they stand in the way of what you want, you're spontaneously irritated and you lash out. I mean, think about this. Have you ever had someone give you the silent treatment? Because somehow, some way, you got in the way of their sovereign plan. And you say to them, you're quiet. The person says, is it a sin to be quiet? That's a clue. You say, I think we need to talk. They say, I don't want to talk right now. You say, I think you're angry. They say, I'm not angry. It makes me so mad when you accuse me of being angry. I'm just being quiet, and I would suggest you be quiet too. I think we need to talk. You do not want to talk to me right now. Now, what's happened there? This person has gotten in your way, and you're not going to stab a knife in their chest, but you'll ascend to the throne of God, and act as if that person is dead for as long as it takes you to satisfy your vengeance. Pretty ugly. Or maybe you're the wife in the marriage and your husband did something that hurt your feelings as he left the house in the morning, and you're now making dinner for him anyway, although you don't think he deserves it, and you're slamming the pans around. I can't believe he would treat me that way. All of a sudden, making dinner has gotten more percussive. Boom, boom, boom. And you want him to come in the kitchen and say, "Is there something wrong?" And you're thinking, "Are you an idiot?" Now, if you pay attention, you can see how universal this is and how young this selfishness operates. I was a kindergarten teacher for 4 years. I used to say it was the 4 longest years of my life. But it really wasn't. They were 4 wonderful years because I was finally, by God's grace, with a group of people I could relate to. And it was an all-day kindergarten, so the very first day of every year, the very most exciting thing on the very first day was lunch. Because for the first time, these children who had chosen a very special lunchbox that they wanted were carrying with them their portable cuisine without their parents. And I had made cubby holes for all of them to put their lunchboxes in, and I lined them up in a single file line to get their lunchbox, and we were sitting around this long table, all of us together. I was thinking we were going to experience kindergarten lunch bliss. I told them not to open their lunchboxes till I had prayed. I prayed, and they immediately tore into the lunchboxes. Billy's sitting next to Susie, and he immediately looks at Susie's lunch and says, "My lunch is better than your lunch." Now, why would he say such a thing? It's not enough for Billy to have the bestest lunch in all of kindergarten. That's what he wants. He wants to have the best lunch. It's not enough for him to have a lunch that his mom and dad had provided for him. And he looks at Susie's lunch and he says this, now holding up this beautiful, plump, fried chicken leg in a plastic bag. He looks at Susie's lunch and says, "Peanut butter, ooh." Susie burst into tears because she now knows she has parents who don't truly love her. And all of a sudden, everybody's comparing lunches with everybody else, and half the class is crying. Billy's still holding up his chicken leg. It's the Trump lunch. I don't think he'll ever eat it. He'll carry this for weeks. About 6 weeks into class, the mom comes to me and she says, "My daughter's lost her watch." Now, I don't know why parents of kindergartners buy them watches. They can't tell time. It'd be better to glue a peanut butter cup to the wrist. At least they would have sustenance in moments of hunger. But they do. I asked around, and 6 children had lost their watches. I knew there was a little Larson in the class. And so I asked around all the children. I finally came to Jimmy. He was the tallest kid in class. You have to look at my posture here. I said, "Jimmy, do you know where those watches are?" He said, "No. No, I don't." Well, he was denying involvement, but he looked guilty. And so without even debating with him, I said, "Jimmy, would you take me to those watches?" He had just denied all knowledge of their existence, and he did this. Walked down the hallway, up the steps into the boys' bathroom. Across from one of the urinals was where their water meter was. He opened up the door, and laying over the water meter were 6 watches. Now, what was the plan? I'm going to fence him to a 3rd grader? You see, Jimmy couldn't abide somebody having something he didn't have. Listen, envy is always shockingly selfish. About 6 months into class, Mom came to me and she said, "My daughter's having a birthday this week. I would love to be able to use the classroom for her birthday party." I said, that's fine, as long as you invite all the children in the class. She said, I'd be glad to do that. Well, that day I occupied the children while she turned that classroom into Birthday Kingdom. And we walked into that classroom, and we were sitting along the same table, and at the end of the table was the seat for Birthday Girl, and there was this big pile, inordinate pile of gifts in front of her. Around everybody else's seat was a bag of party favors. 2 Tootsie Rolls, 2 pieces of gum, a lollipop, and a plastic whistle. The purpose of party favors is to remind you it's not your birthday. And Johnny is sitting directly down the length of the table from Birthday Girl. And he's looking at her big pile of gifts and his little sandwich bag of items not totaling 79 cents. And he's feeling completely ripped off. And he begins to harumph. Well, there was a mother who had enough of him harumping, and she walked the length of the table, and she turned Johnny's chair toward her. She knelt down in front of him. She looked him face to face, and she waxed theological. She said this, Johnny, I want you to hear what I'm about to say. It's not your party. Wives, look at me. Ladies, it will never be about you. Because you've been born into a world that by its very nature is a celebration of another. And if you make it about you, you never are on a pathway of unity and love and understanding. You're never on a pathway of happiness and contentment and joy. You're on a pathway of division and anger and hurt and disappointment. It gets so big, at some point you say, this is too hurtful. I don't want to do this anymore. Guys, it will never be about you. Because you've been born into a world that by its very nature is a celebration of another. And if you make it about you, you'll be angry and impatient and disappointed and hurt. And you'll back away and you'll live in coldness. How many marriages live in a state of marital detente? The sweetness and the closeness is gone. Oh yeah, you're still married, but you're actually in an anti-relationship way of having a relationship. How tragic. How tragic. You see, it is really true that my biggest problem is inside of me, not outside of me. We can make this relationship so uncomfortable. We can be so impatient. We can be so easily irritated. You appoint yourself to be the grammar police. The poor other person can't talk without you correcting them. No, that's not the way that word is said. This is the way that word is said. You appoint yourself as the history police. No, that's not how it happened. You always mix up these stories. You interrupt the person. You always have to tell the story yourself. I was counseling a couple, and they had some young children, and the mom at that point was a stay-at-home mom, and the father was a workaday dad, and she had made for him that evening hamburgers and french fries. He loved that meal. Simple taste, this man. There's tension in their marriage. And she inadvertently put an empty ketchup bottle on the table. And he picked up that empty bottle and held it in front of her and said, "And what do you expect me to do with this?" She told him. Or sometimes you're so prickly and impatient, the other person can't even serve you without criticism. I have an eye condition. My eyes don't shift between the light and darkness very well at night, and so it's dangerous for me to drive. Luella has said she's willing to drive for us. And we live in Philadelphia, and one night we were going out on an agreed-upon destination. Luella's driving. We get to a light where I would have turned, and she goes straight. I can't leave that alone. I say, "Where are you going?" She says, "This is the way I go." I said, "I think it's the wrong way. You know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line." She says, "That's why I didn't turn." She says, "You know, Paul, I don't really think it's a matter of right and wrong. I think it's a matter of preference." That makes sense, doesn't it? I can't leave that alone. I say, "What if my preference is right?" She says, "Paul, why don't we do this? When you drive, you choose the directions. When I drive, I'll choose the directions. That's a good solution." I can't leave that alone. And so I say, "Luella, if we were in a helicopter right now and we are flying over the city of Philadelphia and we would swoop down on this location, you would know that my way is the right way." Luella looks at me and says, "Paul Tripp, I don't think a helicopter is what you need right now."